annual budget hearing. My name is Angela Erdman. I'm the Executive Director of Business and Operations for Manitowoc Public School District. Annually, we present the budget for the public, and so we'll go over just both main revenues and expenditure sides that influence our budget for the year. So the goals of the presentation, we're going to share the primary funding factors, which is mainly the revenue limit. That is our primary source of funding between state aid and local tax levy. Equalized land value, just the increase of land value over time as it's applied to the revenue limits. Membership and enrollment calculations as well. Those are all major pieces that influence that revenue limit calculation. The revenue limit is basically calculated on a really robust Excel worksheet. So all these factors are put into there to help us make our calculations. And we'll highlight the preliminary budget, and we'll share key factors that just shape our financial position and future as a district. So as I've mentioned already, the revenue limits in a nutshell, they provide our primary funding. The revenue limits were put in place in the early 90s, 1993, as a way to limit the amount that districts were able to levy to the taxpayers. So there's two main portions to that, state aid and the local tax levy. So it's driven by the state formula, and it uses a 3-year enrollment average by per pupil revenue amount. So that really is a major factor in that. So for the biennium budget, there were some pretty substantial changes to the revenue limits. MPSD is considered a low revenue district. So before we had $10,000 per student for our revenue limit, and they increased that to $11,000. And so that was unheard of for decades. It was, it's risen slowly over time. In the last 4 to 5 years, it's been stuck at $10,000. So that low revenue ceiling was increased to $11,000. And then next year, we know that we'll have $325 more per student through the revenue limits. And when we talk about the revenue limits, what's more interesting with the conversation now is that typically Manitowoc would levy to its max and use its full revenue limit authority. But we're in a position this year where we have to consider and decide how much we will take in as revenue. And one of those considerations is under levy. So our 3-year resident enrollment average is 4,857 students. And then, as I mentioned, our per pupil revenue amount is $11,000 per student. So with the revenue limit history, just compared to the state average, typically the district has been well under the state average, and we've come close to that in more recent years, especially with our latest operational referendum. So many districts in the state will receive more per student. And so that's what always set Manitowoc apart, because we were a low spending district when the revenue limits were put in place. So usually we were underneath the state average for the revenue limits per member. So enrollment on a year-to-year comparison. So as I mentioned before, there are these 3-year averages that play into our revenue limit calculation. And we are a district, like most in the state, that are dealing with declining enrollment. So we'll have a slide that'll show this in a little bit, but we continue to decline as a district, and that is something as we bring in smaller classes of 4K and kindergartners and graduate larger classes, we have to adjust our staffing and in our budget accordingly. The challenging thing when you have changes to enrollment is it doesn't happen just in one grade level. It's across the whole span of the whole entire district. So that creates an added challenge for us to manage the mounting needs of our district and achieving our objectives. So in this graph here, it's our base year, sort of the second line from the bottom here. It talks about our base year and current year membership average change. So they take 3-year averages of your enrollments and summer school enrollments, and they average those over 3 years. And they'll take sort of the difference between the previous 3 years and the current 3-year average, and they'll do what's called a hold harmless provision. What that means is, and there's a lot of technical jargon in that, but as districts deal with declining enrollment, this hold harmless provision provides additional funding to the district so that it smooths out the decline of enrollment. So if you have a loss of 50 students, that you don't just all of a sudden plummet in revenue. And so counts are finalized in September when we take our count, and this helps smoothen that decrease over time. So for our enrollment trends, our FTE, you can see this is, and it's hard to read the numbers on there, I understand, but we just keep making steady declines in our enrollment. And so our membership count is down 57 students for the year. What I referenced in the previous slide was 30 students. That was based on the preliminary budget that I'm presenting to you right now. When we did our final count, the difference was about 47 students, I believe. So this is a really long historical trend of our enrollment, and it's hard to see all the details on this, of course. But at the end of the day, if you would look at where we are on the far right, that our enrollment right now is comparable to the enrollment of the 1991-92 school year in Manitowoc Public School District. So we, enrollments, rise and fall over time, but we are continuing in that trend. And that will continue for the foreseeable future. So I've talked a little bit or enough about this, the 3-year average already. Just wanted to share this again. But there are different changes in here that are noted on it. So now we're using the counts from the previous 3 years, 22, 23, and 24. And as I've already mentioned, that a majority of the school districts in the state are facing declining enrollment. So property values, so they're a key with state aid. So we receive state aid, based on the number of our counts as well, and that they take that in property values, and they determine how much state aid we receive based on our land values. So currently, we receive more state aid compared to what we can collect from our taxpayers. So that split is 61% to 38% right now. And it was higher last year. So this is a change. 68% of our funding was from the state last year. And a lot of that we've increased with our operational referendum. That is one piece that is kind of swayed that a little bit, where more is coming from our local tax base compared to the state aid. So again, with the property tax, with the local levy, and then the state aid in balance, that makes up what was called that full revenue limit. So in 23-24, we estimate that we will have $38 million in state aid, and the levy will increase significantly from 18 million to 24 million because of the operational referendum. The main reason that we went out to our voters for an operational referendum in spring was because we had, increasing costs over to meet and retain, attract staff, rising costs in cost of goods and services, and with federal funding falling off from ESSER and the pandemic relief funds, that really caused us to be in a situation where our current budget and revenue stream was not going to meet the needs to operate the district effectively. So we went out to the taxpayers in spring, and they approved the referendum. And I should mention too, with the preliminary budget, the $24 million is what we have in the budget. Our full revenue limit authority would allow us to increase the amount that we levy from taxpayers about $3.5 million more. But looking at our needs and what we've budgeted, we should be able to under levy that $3.5 million. So just, referencing that operational referendum, it's always important that we hold true to what we say to taxpayers. If we didn't need the full amount, we weren't going to levy the full amount. So that's what the plan is in this case. Of course, it's up to the Board of Education to formally approve the budgets. And the factors like the final state aid, final counts, and land values, that will all make these numbers shift just a little bit in the next week or two. And the board will formally approve the budget at the special meeting at the end of the month. So our equalized property valuation history. So we've had significant increases in our property values. So really over a year ago, I ran this when we were preparing for the referendum, and the average over the last 40 years was like 3.74%, something like that, real 3.7%. And what was really interesting to see was that those increases haven't been that much in, over the course of time. So the last 2 years, we've had historical increases, 16.89% last year, and then 14.05%. And actually the final numbers did come in on this, and this was 13.9% that the property value increases for MPSD. So really the amount we levy, that $24 million or whatever the final levy is, divided by this property value, and that determines our mill rate. So that's the basic math calculation that is conducted to make that, to calculate that value. And just as a summary of the revenue limit, there are many factors in here. Our revenue limit is just estimated to be $66 million. Our equalized valuation, we talked about in the previous slide. And so then 38 million is the amount that we're estimating that will be collected in state aid, and then 24 million through the tax levy. So again, we would be under levying about $3.5 million with this plan in place. So, I apologize, I have a typo in here where this didn't get fully updated here. So for our we'll skip this. With the tax levy mill rate history, last year our mill rate was, it was estimated to be 5.25, ended up being $5.51. And this year it is estimated to go up to $6.41. That's considering the levy that we have in place, or the proposed levy, that's what the mill rate would be. So some of that, when we get our finalized state aid with the updated property valuation, may adjust this slightly. I'm going to give a quick overview of all of the different funds, and then I'll be brief with this. So with revenues and expenditures for Fund 10. So Fund 10 is our main operating fund that we use to operate the district. So the main revenues are estimated to be a total, or being in the preliminary budget, are $74 million. And then the expenditures are $74 million as well. There is a change and a difference, and we're proposing a deficit budget of $267,000. That is mainly to use up common school funds that are already in our fund balance, along with using some other aids that have been paid through from the state already through a Get Kids Ahead grant. So that's just how we have to reflect it in the budget, since it's monies that we have already received. So as I mentioned, the operational referendum is included in this. The federal revenues in this budget are greatly reduced because we've used those primarily to balance our budget in the previous year. We did a 4.5% CPI increase for all staff. And then in the operational referendum, we talked about very strategically increasing certain areas. Technology, $400,000 more for a transfer to Fund 46 for technology capital improvements. $300,000 for technology, just replacement of devices like the computers that teachers use in classrooms. It's really important that we keep those items up to date, and we're replacing them. Otherwise, it slows down learning and our efficiency to serve our students. $200,000 additional for curriculum and development fees, and then $500,000 for buildings and grounds projects. The increase in the areas and all total up $1.4 million. So the approach as proposed in the operational referendum helps us meet these objectives, and were put into place as proposed for this preliminary budget. Special education. This is, I apologize, I had the totals in here for Fund 10 yet. So for Fund 27, there is $15 million for Fund 27 revenues and expenditures. Fund 27 works in conjunction with Fund 10, and it has to balance exactly. So this is a pretty substantial increase this year for Fund 27. And so that's, we are mandated to provide special education to students who are identified, and that gets balanced off of Fund 10. So our Fund 10 transfer at the bottom is expected to go from $7.9 million to $9.7 million this year. Main factors, increases to staffing, transportation costs are all impacts on that. So Fund 38 is our debt service fund. We have no budget for Fund 38 because we have no more debt. So that is something that, as a district, we can be very proud of the fact that we have no more debt this year. So while that's a celebration in a sense, it's not. It's very atypical for a district to not have debt. So one way to look at it is that when you have debt service, it means you were able to make substantial projects, put things in place, and take care of things in advance, sometimes for a lower cost for borrowing, and to work ahead on larger projects and pay them off over time. So it is very uncommon for a school district to not have any debts over time. And Fund 38 debt was what we had before, and that was school board approved debt. They're able to approve certain amounts of debt, where Fund 39 is referendum approved debt. The last time Manitowoc Public School District had payments on Fund 39 debt, I believe, was the 2019 fiscal year. Fund 46 for the Long-Term Capital Improvements Trust. This is a newer fund. So we were able to start spending from Fund 46 in the last 2 school years, or in the last 2 fiscal years. So part of that plan, again, as I had mentioned before, is that we were transferring $400,000 every year from Fund 10 over into 46. And the main reason is to work strategically to plan so that we can make our capital improvements to technology on a regular basis. And so we'll talk about that a little bit in the projects, but what we're working on for current projects in the current budget is wired and wireless capital technology upgrades. And we just have to do those upgrades. That's one of the main reasons we scheduled that transfer and are planning for that more strategically. JFK indoor track replacement, that is a track that was last replaced, I believe, in 1980 or 81. It is well past its useful life, and we need to plan to replace it. So that is a part of the budget plan. Jefferson Playground Project was paid out of this fund. And then we have critical elevator upgrades at Lincoln, Washington, and Wilson. Probably as old as the needs. It's probably been almost 40 years since these elevators have been updated. So really, this is allowing the extra money in the referendum is allowing us to make more progress in Fund 10 with some of these projects and use up, and we're also able to utilize money in other funds like 46 to take care of some of these projects as well. Looking ahead to 24-25, and part of what that money, like that $400,000 that we would transfer over to Fund 46, we have several outdated public address systems in our school, learning about just that create severe safety issues that we need to upgrade along with our phone systems. So those things will come in tandem. And so, we're excited to make progress on these systems to benefit our district. Fund 50 food service. So what we have in here is our Fund 50 food service budget, $2.4 million for our revenues and $2.9 million for expenditures. So the main change with this Fund 50 budget is the change from going from the CEP model to the free, reduced, and paid structure. So, there's going from CEP where we were getting higher claim amounts. We were feeding hundreds more students breakfast and lunch daily. So we have our same labor line within our budget, but we have we're feeding less kids over time. There are some changes though for revenues where because we're not doing the CEP, like parents that are paying for lunches or paying the reduced rate, that is additional revenue coming in there. So with food service budget this year, it's It's just a challenge to know exactly where things will land, and we had to make our best guess at the time based on the changing structure. So those are the main reasons for the change in that. So we have a very healthy fund balance in Fund 50 right now. So it ended around $1,078,000. DPI wants us to keep no more than 3 operating months of expenses within our fund. So we've been working similar to other districts that also experienced, larger equity buildup through the pandemic. We have to work and show DPI that we are working to use this fund balance up. So last year, we did $275,000 of dishwasher upgrades at 3 schools. So that was a nice opportunity for us to work and invest in our district, because our food service hot lunch program is turning 20 years. So naturally, a lot of our equipment is starting to age out. So the general budget, all funds and our general financial position are listed above there. So overall, if you look at the bottom of the first section, our ending fund balance is estimated to be $20.5 million at the end of the year. So our total revenues between all funds, $90 million, and expenditures are $92 million for revenues, $90 million for expenditures. And the overall use of fund balance would be $2.2 million. So all of the funds, remember Fund 10, our main general operational fund, would just be operating at that $267,000 deficit. The larger amount for that deficit is due to using like those Fund 46 funds. Those monies are already in those funds. And so that's just how we have to reflect it in the fund balance and the accounting piece of it all. So this just shows general revenues by sources, and we've talked a little bit about this before, especially through that revenue limit. Our local sources are primarily your tax levy. We have other sources of money that come in for our Fund 10 and special education budgets, but it's mainly through local sources and state sources. State sources are your state aid, and then our federal sources are 8%. For our general and special education expenses by budget source, salaries and benefits are always going to be most of your expenses. On here, it looks to be like about 60%, but really some of the transfer out ends up being money that goes to Fund 27 that funds a lot of our salaries in there. So really, a district's budget, similar in other school districts, is that 80% is your staffing and compensation. This is by educational function. It's very hard to read this as well, and this is published online too, but the main summary point to understand with this is that our elementary general English, our main subjects, are the ones that take up the most amount of our gross total expenditures. Special education is the next, transfers, central building administration, custodial, and then other supports, student supports, take up the majority of our budgets. So open enrollment, that ends up being a pretty large factor in our school district. We continue to be net negative for open enrollment. So we have 107 students enrolling in, and we have 348 students enrolling out, for a net in and out of 241 students. So we have to pay that as an additional expenditure out of our fund, or out of our Fund 10. So this just shows here where the imbalance on the left side, the light yellow bars are our open enrollment in and then our out. And then you can see just the amounts that we're paying. We're paying close to $2 million in open enrollment expenses every year. Private school vouchers. Private school vouchers is another key piece, and that through the biennium budget was increased, the amount that we have to pay for school vouchers. So 3 main private schools in our community receive money through vouchers: Roncalli, Lutheran High, and First German. The amounts are listed up there as I'm able to collect from DPI. And what does that make up of the levy? So the reason the district has to serve as a pass-through and collect the revenues for levies and pay them out to the state. and then they pay them to the private schools. So of the tax levy, it's estimated that 88% per thousand will be going to private schools. So summary points, so we have revenue limit authority, and it provides our main source of funding. It's finalized around October 15th. So the preliminary budget approved on September 12th is what I've shared here for information today. State aids are being finalized, transfer of service, revenue for uncounted pupils, all of the vouchers, that all gets finalized. With the biennium budget, with the low revenue ceiling and increasing, you know, as I mentioned before, the board is going to be able to decide if they want to, you know, while we're proposing to not levy to the full extent, there is a choice that we could take in more revenue if that was what the board would want to do. So, but that's just kind of how the math all works out with that. We have our enrollment continues to decline, and we continue to face challenges with the cost of open enrollment. So working to attract students to the district is something we would like to, of course, keep working on doing. With the elimination of ESSER funding, that provides a challenge. Operational referendum helped or assisted with that. We've talked about vouchers already, and the passage of the operational referendum, we've already mentioned that already. But that, you know, the victory in that is allowed us to strategically put funds towards certain areas to work on certain areas where we had more needs, some capital improvements, technology, curriculum, to assist the district. So that is all I have for that. Lots of talking. I don't know if we have some time for questions, otherwise we can move forward.
Sure. So, if you want to, if anyone has.
Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Could you repeat what you said about common school funds and how much is left and what their plan for using them is?
Yeah, so we have about $415,000 placed in common school funds. Common school funds are the money that are used to purchase library books in our district. So speeding tickets, when you pay in money for those types of things, are money that fund common school funds. And so they're items that have to be placed in the library, housed in the library. And the plan for that is, and Lee works with the librarians on common school funding, but we should spend that down as quickly as we're able to, and have a distinct plan. So usually we collect about $300,000. So we have about $100,000 additional in fund balance. So they're developing plans to use the common school fund balance. But I don't know if I answered that. Yep, sorry. Any other questions?
So with the voucher program, is a voucher considered even if it's public school to public school, or is it different between public school and private school?
The vouchers are just public school to private school. And there's a special needs scholarship program, that's the special education funding for private schools as well.
And we're up to about $2 million per year in.
The vouchers is actually up to $3.3 million, correct. So it's about $190,000 for the special needs scholarship program. I'm forgetting my acronyms right now. And then about 3.1 estimated for just the private school vouchers. Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending. I will get out of the way. So.
Thank you, Angela.
Yeah.